This is the latest in SpaceX news. Police and residents in a Japanese coastal town have been left baffled by a large iron ball that has washed up on a local beach, with authorities admitting they have no idea what it is, only that it isn't about to explode. The sphere, measuring about 1.5 meters in diameter, has been at the center of fevered speculation since it washed up on Enshu Beach in the city of Hamamatsu on the country's Pacific coast, local media reports said. Fears that it could be a stray mine were dismissed after experts used X-ray technology to examine the object's interior and found that it was hollow. There are no indications, either, that it was involved in espionage by nearby North Korea or China. The presence of two raised handles on the sphere's surface, indicating it can be hooked onto something else, prompted a more prosaic explanation, that it is a mooring buoy that had simply worked loose and floated off. Police began inspecting the ball, which is orangey-brown with what appear to be darker patches of rust, after a local woman spotted it resting on the sand just meters from the shore while she was out for a walk earlier this week, Asahi TV reported. Officers cordoned off the area and called in explosives experts dressed in protective clothing to investigate further, but reports say authorities still don't know what the sphere is or where it came from. A mysterious metal ball spotted on a beach in Hamamatsu City this week prompted local police to scramble the bomb squad. A careful examination revealed it is not a threat, but shed no light on what it actually is. In other news, NASA warns of budget challenges in the year ahead. Despite its successes last year, the leadership of NASA warns that the coming year could be more challenging as it fights to preserve its budget on Capitol Hill. Speaking at the Spacecom conference here February 22, Bob Cabana, NASA Associate Administrator, said securing funding to support future Artemis missions and other agency priorities may be difficult given proposals in Congress to reduce overall federal spending. I think this year is going to be even more challenging for us than 2022, he said, citing what we have to accomplish in order to set our course for the future and ensure that we are successful. NASA got nearly $25.4 billion in the fiscal year 2023 omnibus spending bill enacted in December, an increase of 5.6% from the $24 billion it received in 2022. Cabana called that increase outstanding but cautioned, "I think we're going to have some challenges. Those difficulties," said Alicia Brown, Associate Administrator for NASA's Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, "come from proposals by the new Republican leadership in the House to cut spending for fiscal year 2024, such as going back to fiscal year 2022 levels. It is going to be a tough couple of years for us," she said at Spacecom, citing those budget-cutting proposals. "We're concerned about how it affects human spaceflight and Artemis, but it's going to affect all of our programs." She said NASA was particularly worried about how it would affect later missions in the Artemis program. "What we can do right now in this fiscal year is ensure that there is not a big gap between Artemis 3, our first landing, and Artemis 4, our first gateway mission. NASA's current plans envision Artemis 3 launching as soon as 2025, followed by Artemis 4 in 2027. Those schedules depend on the development of several new or upgraded capabilities, including SpaceX's Starship lunar lander for Artemis 3 and, for Artemis 4, both the first gateway elements as well as the Block 1B version of the Space Launch System. We, and hopefully our partners, are going to spend a lot of time on the Hill talking about why it's important, maybe in the context of what countries like China are doing, and why Congress needs to make those investments now and us to ensure that we've got a strong, steady cadence of lunar landings," Brown said. NASA, in its fiscal year 2023 budget proposal, requested $26 billion in 2023. That proposal included a projected budget of $26.5 billion in 2024, increasing to $28.1 billion in 2027. The White House is expected to release its fiscal year 2024 budget proposal March 9. Regulatory challenges. Cabana and Brown said they are closely watching developments regarding regulation of the commercial space industry. While NASA is not a regulator, it is increasingly relying on industry for many capabilities, including transporting astronauts and, eventually, using commercial space stations. "Commercial LEO destinations, I think, is going to be a huge challenge," Cabana said. He cited NASA's work with Axiom Space on private astronaut missions to the International Space Station as a way to learn how to work commercial partners on space stations. Those proposed stations face their own challenges in regulatory oversight, with no agency having clear authority to regulate them and provide the authorization and continuing supervision required by the Outer Space Treaty. "It's going to be an interesting year in DC for commercial space setting up the regulatory framework going forward," Brown said. One near-term milestone is the impending expiration of current restrictions on the Federal Aviation Administration to enact safety regulations for spaceflight participants, a learning period that has been in place since 2004 and extended several times. "That's a big thing that the FAA and Congress are looking at," she said. "It has ripple effects throughout industry. While the FAA can't currently regulate safety of commercial spaceflight participants, NASA does have the ability to impose requirements on companies flying NASA astronauts and supporting the ISS. Cabana suggested those have become de facto regulations for non-NASA commercial space activities. "When they are off on their own, NASA doesn't have anything to do with that," he said of such missions. "But when you look at how SpaceX operates those missions, they follow the same procedures that NASA has helped them put into place for our missions. I think we're laying the groundwork on what needs to get done, and as we license, eventually, these commercial LEO destinations, we'll see what comes out from a regulatory point of view," he continued. "There's a lot of work that's going to need to get done between now and then. Those stations will also need some kind of mission authorization to comply with the Outer Space Treaty that the National Space Council is currently studying." In a separate presentation at Spacecom, Richard Dalbello, director of the Office of Space Commerce, said he expects a proposal for mission authorization to soon emerge from that effort. "I think they're pretty close to wrapping it up." He said he supported a light-touch regulatory approach to avoid burdening companies and emerging new space markets. "The first thing we do hear from industry is, be careful with what you do with regulation," he said, promoting an approach to provide the minimum regulations needed for safety and upholding international obligations. "We are mindful of that. The White House mission authorization proposal that emerges from the ongoing effort will not be the end of the process. There will be a broader dialogue with Congress on this," he said, providing legal authorities and other requirements. "Ultimately, they will play a key role in all of this." In other news, As SpaceX prepares to attempt Starship's first orbital flight, the company is contemplating military applications for the Super Heavy launch vehicle. Starship holds the potential to become a mobility platform for the U.S. military, said Gary Henry, Senior Advisor for National Security Space Solutions at SpaceX. Speaking February 21 at the Space Mobility Conference, Henry said the experience SpaceX will gain launching Starlink satellites on Starship and developing the vehicle for NASA's Artemis program will help the U.S. military better understand how to employ it for cargo delivery and other missions. Henry, a former Boeing executive and U.S. Air Force officer, is working with the Air Force Research Laboratory on potential concepts for using rockets for point-to-point cargo delivery under a $102 million 5-year contract awarded in 2020. Other space companies have signed agreements with U.S. Transportation Command to explore rocket cargo concepts, but only SpaceX has won a large contract. Greg Spangers, program manager for rocket cargo at AFRL, said the military envisions a future when it could be cheaper to send cargo via rocket than by transport aircraft. In a national security or humanitarian crisis, a launch vehicle would fly from Cape Canaveral, for example, and either land on an austere field to deliver cargo or airdrop it. For the rocket cargo program to be viable, Spangers said, DoD expects to use launch providers that fly frequently so they can offer competitive pricing. To make this a success, we need a very high launch rate, and we need to have systems that re-enter and that can bring a high down mass, he added. With regard to Starship, Henry said, SpaceX is forecasting mass to orbit costs falling from $2,000 a kilogram to $200 a kilogram, or even lower, he said.